What's up, Internet? We are back with more new loot, jazz hands, that I've acquired over this past quarter-ish of 2023. I'm trying to be on top of this, unlike, the last few that have been like 6 months apart at the best of times. So yeah, new loot. Let's get into this with some new games, starting off with something I'm actually kind of really sad about. This was something I was actually really excited about. We have Wild Hearts. This is basically knockoff Monster Hunter by the people who made knockoff Monster Hunter back when it was called Toukiden. This is conceptually a pretty interesting game. There's a lot of things I don't like about it, but the most damning thing about it is very little of it works. This game is incredibly buggy. Fun story, like you can see I got this on PlayStation. This game was so broken that for one day I could actually play online multiplayer without PSN for some reason, because that was just flat out broken. Nothing was working. They fixed that. Pretty much all my other issues with this game they did not fix, however, and that's not so good. But it's sort of like Monster Hunter. You run around killing these giant monsters, but the biggest gimmick is, like down here, you can build all these little traps sort of on the fly as monsters are attacking you. I think it really breaks the flow of game and makes you super vulnerable, and I didn't enjoy that all that much. However, I did kind of like one concept. It does feel a little bit Shadow of the Colossus-y. You can climb on monsters and you can see like glowing spots on their body, and you can actually absorb energy and do a lot of damage to them while healing yourself, and I think you get like a little bit of a energy like damage buff if you like steal their health, which gives you more energy to make more traps as well. So it's really beneficial to do that. Unfortunately, whenever you latch onto a monster to do anything like absorb their energy, the game's camera completely freaks out. Like, I was fighting this giant gorilla, and he has a glowing spot on both of his shoulders. I jumped at him, I grabbed him, and I grabbed his face. Now, his face is about 2 or 3 inches away from either shoulder, so really, all I had to do was go left like an inch or right like an inch, and I would have gotten like the critical heal / damage to him. Somehow, in that time, like the camera starts spinning all over the place, zooming in and out, like I swear it flipped upside down at one point, and in that small bit of me trying to move like an inch to the left or right, it didn't matter, to get to those vulnerable areas, I somehow climbed down the entire length of his body, hopped off his feet, and then walked off into the sunset, and I wish I was joking about that. That is not an exaggeration. The camera freaks out so much, and I think the controls try and compensate for it, because I was just holding in one direction, and like the whole thing just completely doesn't work. And it's a real shame too, because while the enemies are tuned to be very difficult if you play alone, which is a problem with a lot of Monster Hunter games I've found, especially when it comes to HP scaling and stuff, this game actually has quite a lot of really cool weapons and stuff. I found myself quite in love with the parasol up here, which actually does very little damage because it's effectively a shield, but if you parry with it, you do an insane amount of damage to your opponent. You just do like rapid stacked damage. I had a lot of fun with that, and having to time like the parries to the giant monsters was exhilarating. Unfortunately, the game had like a really weirdly inconsistent frame rate, and again, basically nothing worked. If it did work, this might have actually been a fun game, but it didn't, and as far as I can tell, there are still issues with it to this day, but I can't be bothered to go back and try it again, which is a shame because this game had a lot of potential, and I was super excited about it. Next we have Ryuga Gokuto Ishin on the PS5. I actually already have this on the PS3, but this is a new... It's not new, again, it's a PS3 game, but it's a new Yakuza game, as set in the, past, where Kazuma Kiryu is now a samurai as opposed to a Yakuza. Except now he's Ryoma Sakamoto, who seems to think he's also Hajime Saito, which I will tell you, while I'm no historian, is not factually or historically accurate, but it's Yakuza with swords and guns, and it's actually a really fun time, and for a game that came out forever ago but wasn't available in English, getting this in English is quite cool. Unfortunately, this game also has like weird DLC that came in, like I think it was mostly pre-order stuff, but it was like DLC that was also limited one-time use stuff, which is always a bad sign, and of course this didn't exist in the PS3 version. So it seems like they're adding a lot of extra faff that really just drags the game down. But if you like Yakuza, this is more Yakuza. I think it's a little weird that they took the Like a Dragon name though, because while that is true to the Japanese series name, Like a Dragon, the previous one, was a completely different style from the other games which went by the Yakuza title. Those were 3D beat-em-ups that were really, really, really good. And Like a Dragon, the 7th one in the series, the first one of its name, was an RPG, which I really got to get a chance to play at some point, but taking the RPG name and slapping it on this feels kind of weirdly incorrect because it's not an RPG, it's the older style game. And of course it is a remake of an older game, but I feel like that's just weird branding that doesn't necessarily work to anyone's benefit. But either way, it's more Yakuza, and it's one we didn't have in English. Now if only we could get Kenzan, we'll be set because we'll have pretty much all the old PS3 ones available to us on the PS5 and PS4. And that'd be quite cool. Next, we have Octopath Traveler 2. I actually don't have anything to say about this because I haven't played it yet. But I do quite like Octopath 1. That was it was a game of the year it came out. And I look forward to going in and seeing just how broken this game is. I remember in the original Octopath, one specific character could get their ultimate weapon if they just wandered into like one town and spoke to one specific character and then used their ability on it. I'm really hoping there's more like sort of secret, unbelievably broken stuff like that. But again, I gotta find the time to play this. Looking forward to it when I get the moment, but it just hasn't come up just yet. Next we have Fire Emblem Engage. I have not played very far into this because the main concept just wasn't engaging with me, so to speak. Your main character looks like a tube of toothpaste. That's a joke that's existed forever, but it's true. But what really bugs me about it is I don't like the core concept of the Emblem and Engage system. As you can see, Marth is back, which, if you haven't heard my whole rant about Marth not needing to be in Fire Emblem anymore, I feel like he's shoved into Fire Emblem nowadays just to appease the Smash crowd. Like, you know, if you were around when Fire Emblem 7 first came out in North America, the very first one, the first question anyone asked is, where's Marth and Roy? We want to play as Marth and Roy. And they weren't available. And, you know, it wasn't until the DS remake of the original game came out that we ever actually got a chance to play as Marth. And I think that his continual existence in the very popular Smash is what makes him get shoved into everything. Like, Fire Emblem Awakening had Lucina show up, say, I'm Marth, and then 2 seconds later in the same cutscene get told off for it and say, no, you're not, introduce yourself properly, and it felt like it was pandering just to draw in the Smash crowd, and to this day that bugs me. But the idea with Engage is you basically play as Toothpaste Chan, and you have these things known as emblems, which are effectively equipment that carries the soul of previous lords from previous games, which on the bright side at least gives some value to Lyn, who is like my favorite lord of all time, but she's awful, because she's actually kind of okay in this game. I haven't got her yet, but I just don't like the idea of having to staple on a secondary character to your main character just to use as a piece of equipment, really just to draw in people nostalgic to the series. Like, as much as I don't care for Three Houses basically being, you know, the Persona games were popular, so let's just make our game take place at a school, that game felt like it was more about something, whereas this felt more pandery to me. But again, I've only played a few levels of this, but it did not hook me, so I can't really speak much about Engage. It's so far not fun, and I really just want to go back and play Sacred Stones, or Three Houses, or Fire Emblem 7, or Awakening, or the older ones, or even some of the fan-modded ones, even though like the one I have is actually really awful. I'm not feeling engaged so far. I'm gonna have to give it more time when I get a moment, but so far, not engaging. Alright, our next game is Legend of Heroes Trails to Azure. Now I said this last loot video, but I got Trails to Zero, which is the predecessor to this, and I haven't touched that one yet. But I'm really just sort of getting these right now so that it's not hard to do later on. Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky on the PSP is ridiculously hard to get, but I have it on Steam, but still, I kind of want a physical version. So I'm just collecting these right now so that it's not a problem later on. It's the Digital Deluxe Edition, which means that it comes with, or it's the Physical Deluxe Edition, digital, you can tell where my brain's at. Comes with a soundtrack, but I think it's a digital code, so I'm going to have to recover that at some point. I've been listening a lot to the soundtrack to the previous game, though, which I also got a soundtrack for, and that was quite good. But I really like the Legend of Heroes games. I played a lot of Trails in the Sky last year. I reviewed it. It was one of my Game of the Years. Played Trails in Cold Steel a couple years ago. I very close to the end, but never bothered finishing it. I really should go back and finish that. But really love that game. That was one of my Game of the Years as well. I think this is just a series I really like. But similar to, say, Yakuza, I don't think it's the kind of game you can play back to back to back to back, because they will wear you down because of just how big and detailed these games are. They are huge games with really intricately designed worlds, and you gotta take your time with them. You can't just rush in and go straight through them, or you will wear yourself out very quickly. But if you're looking for some really good RPGs, well, I've not played this one, and apparently there's another one coming out this year, which, oh my god, I'm gonna wear myself out, and I haven't even started these ones yet. You know, look into the Legend of Heroes games, or at least watch my review. One of those things. But it's a good series, damn it. Okay, so that's pretty much all the new games we've got. So next we got some used games. Pretty much all of these I got from one seller on eBay. Basically, they had one or two games I really wanted, a bunch of stuff that looked kind of interesting, and they were sort of like doing that, well, we saw that you stopped by on our page, so we're offering you like a best offer thing, and then I undercut that and they accepted it. I wasn't really planning on buying all this stuff, but I got some of them, and I showed off a few of these during my birthday stream several months ago, so if you want to see some of the stuff, we have that. But we're going to start off with Crossblades, or X-Blades. I know that this is either the sequel to or the sequel to this is Blades of Time, which I know as the game that the developer or publisher sent out like the most botched newsletter about ever to pundits. It's really quite interesting. You should look it up, because Blades of Time has like one of the worst like news articles ever like sent to people just to like hype them up about it. They had the subject line cut in half and then like reinserted in front and behind. It looks really awful. Look it up, it's very weird. But this is supposed to be like a hacky slashy sort of Devil May Cry type of thing, and that could be a lot of fun. Also, it's 17 plus, so there's probably blood and gore and probably breasts, and that's okay. But I'm always looking for interesting games sort of from this area, and I'm always trying to build up my collection for like PS3 and 360, because there were so many interesting games. This next game I picked up because I had never heard of this. We have Spectral Force 3. I know Spectral Force Genesis on the DS, but I thought it was a one-off. There's apparently an Xbox 360 Spectral Force, and if you're not familiar with Spectral Force, it was like a sort of a tactical strategy RPG sort of thing, very anime from what I remember. Haven't had a chance to play this one yet, but it looks interesting, and it's very obscure. I've never even heard of it, and I'd like to think pretty on top of the 360 library and the games I still wanted for it, but this showed up in the seller's like other items. I was like, what is this? Okay, I can get this cheap, I'm gonna. Next we have a game I actually really did want. This is one of my more wanted 360 games. We have El Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron. This game, all I really know about it is it has an incredible art style and it just looks weird, and it got recently put out on like the Switch. So if you want a cheaper version, do it there, because the 360 version is a little bit expensive, PS3 version is absurdly so. But it's a 3D third-person action game with an incredible art style, from what I hear. It's kind of like oil painting, as I understand, which looks really interesting. This is one on my list. I'm glad to have it. It is, when I got time to just tootle around with a game, this is one of the ones I really want to consider up front. Next we have a game I have played a bit of. We've got Ridge Racer 6. I'm actually not super familiar with Ridge Racer. I've played a little bit of Ridge Racer 1 on the PlayStation Classic, and it's not very fun. I've played a little bit of Ridge Racer 64 on my multi-cart. That too was not great. And I know that this is the series that caused Namco to trademark the concept of having games on loading screens, which meant that no one else could have games on loading screens for like the longest time. And the saddest thing of all is they never did anything with it. So we had all these terrible loading screens for years that, and I think this lapsed like in 2016, 2017, something like that. But now we're at the point where loading screens are so short that people are artificially lengthening them just so you can read the tooltips and stuff. So in the entire time we could have used actually having stuff to do on loading screens, Namco stole that from us. And that's because patenting game mechanics is a terrible idea, and yet somehow people still somehow do it. And they drag down the entire industry in doing so. But this game is actually kind of okay. You've got like this huge map of challenges you need to do, and they're sort of laid out like a spider's web, and when you like clear a node by like doing all the little races around certain parts on that spider's web, you then unlock the like secret unlockable inside the portion of the web you just surrounded. It's a neat way to unlock things, and there's a lot of content here. I have played this for a fair bit of time actually, and I had fun with it. And I would like to play more of this. Ridge Racer 6, pretty good, pretty good. Next we have a game my brother was super into, probably about when he was in elementary or middle school, and I saw this and I thought, yeah, let's play this. And I got really into it. We have Thrillville Off the Rails. This is, well, it's by LucasArts, and it's actually, it's published by that, but it's actually made by the people who made Planet Coaster. And what this is basically, it's Roller Coaster Tycoon, except instead of like a cursor in the sky that's actively like designing this place, you play a kid running around these amusement parks as you build them, and you can talk to all your various guests, get tips on them. The first park I went to actually was filled with robots, and you had to do all these secret missions, like awkwardly flirt with them just to confuse them to make them go away, because your park can only have so many people at once, and these robots were basically there just to harass you. So it had some fun, weird mini games and missions and stuff to do in order to advance your park and make them more interesting. You can design your own roller coasters, which is great. Everything has mini games associated with it. That's actually what I knew this game from. When my brother played this back when he was in like elementary school, he once got me into playing this like sort of bubble bobble-ish platformer where there was like this horrible robots rabbit head chasing you down. It was like the most genuinely unintentionally terrifying thing ever, and while I remembered basically nothing about the game, I remembered that, and I actively went and searched that out in this game, and I found it, and it was so good. Like the mini games in this are genuinely quite good, and it was actually a very cheap game. I think I paid like $2 for this. Worth it. I sunk probably about 20 hours into that. That's a lot of fun. I could see myself sinking a lot more. Next we have Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures, based on the hit cartoon I've Never Seen. I played a little bit of this during my birthday stream, and all I could really say is how many people actually watched this cartoon, because I genuinely don't ever remember it being on TV. And then I remembered that weird, awkward CGI Mega Man cartoon that came out a few years ago that I don't think anyone ever actually watched either, and I hear wasn't all that good. This is sort of like, Pac-Man World, which is a game I really like, because I don't really care for Pac-Man, but when you turn Pac-Man into like a platformer or do something interesting, Pac in Time did a great job with that, but that was a reskin of a completely different game. Pac-Man 2 did it significantly less well, and I hate that game. But this is sort of like a bad version of Pac-Man World. In fact, it even says Pac is back, which was actually the, I believe, the marketing handle for Pac-Man World as well. But this is kind of like a knockoff Pac-Man World, and if you like Pac-Man World, you might find this to be okay, not great. But it's cheap, and if you can get it cheap, it's fun for a little bit. I enjoyed it enough that I'd be willing to buy the sequel if I could find it cheap. But I'd also rather just get the Pac-Man World games. Next we have probably my second most wanted game after El Shaddai. We have Majin and the Forsaken Kingdom. This is a game that always interested me, and similar to El Shaddai, it's gonna have to be like right on my like quick to play list when I get some time. But this is like an asymmetric sort of platformer adventure. You play this little guy, but you got like this big guy following you around, and he fights things, and you have to distract enemies, and you got to work together to sort of handle puzzles, as I understand. Not dissimilar to, say, something like, The Last Guardian, but this came out a long time before that. But to be fair, The Last Guardian was in development hell since like the PS2, so yeah. Either way, interesting game. I played the demo, I enjoyed it, want to play the full version, and now I have it. That was a huge score for me. Alright, next we have a PS1 game, because I've sort of made it a goal of this year to work a lot on my Genesis and PS2 lists, because the fact is I haven't really been building them up all that much. Like, I never had a PS2 or a PS1 back in the day, and so I never really had much experience with PS1. And while I had a Genesis back in the day, my family never let me buy games, so I only ever had 2 games, and then my Genesis got stolen. So I've been trying to acquire these games these past years, and the PS1 and Genesis have sort of been my goals for this year to work on. This is unintentionally an addition to my PS1 library. We have Starwinder: The Ultimate Space Race. I vaguely remember this game. I think I saw it on a TV show or something where you have to like fly, like you're in a race, but you're like flying on these like rails in space, and the closer to the rail you get, like the faster you go, but there's more obstacles, so you can kind of like duck in and out, sort of like Death Star trench run style, in a race. And it sounded interesting, but no one was buying this, and I got it for like $1, so that's cool. Maybe not great, but it's something to work on my PS1 collection, so that's cool. Next we have like the game that actually made me start buying from this person. We have Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time. And I started buying this because I'm sort of getting more and more of a taste for the Ratchet & Clank games. Like, I reviewed Ratchet & Clank 1 several years ago, I reviewed Ratchet & Clank 2 last year, and I realized, you know, I've got the collection digitally, but I don't have any of the PS3 games. And I imagine they're not that expensive, but they might be harder to get. So if I can start getting them now before they really ramp up in price, that's what I'd like to do. So here it is. It's a new Ratchet & Clank game. That's the extent I really know about this, but it was the thing that sort of led me to this seller to actually start buying all this stuff. So that's sort of how we started all of this. Next we have JSAF, Jane's Advanced Strike Fighters. This is a very old series of flight sims on PC from what I remember, or at least they used to be, and I believe they were lauded for being very realistic. I was more of an F-15 Strike Eagle kind of guy, but you know, this was a pretty big name in the PC flight sim genre. This game kind of interested me because it was like the first Jane's game that came out in like, I think 10 years. And it was a console game of all things. So what was this? How is it? Well, I played it, and it can be best described as really bad knockoff Ace Combat. Like, the PS3 had, the only other Ace Combat game it had really was Assault Horizon, which is not even Ace Combat. It's basically all the flying sections from all the Call of Duty games strung together. This is marginally better than that. It also had Hawks, but those were the games that like let you flip your planes and stuff in really awkward ways. If you ignore that, the Hawks games were better, but only marginally. This game is very, 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 very boring. It's Ace Combat, but everything's clumsier, slower, and less interesting. That's the best way for me to put JSAF. It's not that good. I was super excited for it. Unfortunately, not that good. Next, we have a PS2 game that I really wanted. Unfortunately, no case, but we have Disgaea 2. Unfortunately, it's a PS3 case. This would be the second PS2 game I have in a PS3 case, and I'm gonna have to do something about that. But I quite like Disgaea. I started the series off with Disgaea 1 on the DS. Pro tip, don't play Disgaea 1 on the DS. It is the most unplayable way to play Disgaea ever. Then I jumped to Disgaea 3 on the PS3, and that is still my favorite one in the series. And now I think there's like a 6th one out there, which I didn't even realize there was a 5th. I might be a little behind. But Disgaea 2 was a game I really wanted to get a hold of, and I'm slowly building up my N1 collection on the PS2. I've got quite a few, actually. I've got Soul Nomad and the World Eaters, I've got Manichemia, I've got like 6 copies of La Pucelle for some reason. I'm working on it, but weirdly enough, I have every version of Phantom Brave but the PS2 version for some reason. But yeah. Alright, the next game we've got is Armed and Dangerous. This game interests me a lot because this is a sort of spiritual, unintentional, but kinda sequel to a PS2 game I love an awful lot. called Giants Citizen Kabuto. And Giant Citizen Kabuto was a game I stumbled upon at a garage sale and got for like $5. And ironically, I bought that thinking it was a different game entirely, a PC game called Outcast, which has since been released on Steam and has been given a remaster. And apparently a sequel's coming out this year. I have got to play that. And I really have to talk about Outcast at some point because that game is awesome. Armed and Dangerous is kind of an unintentional sequel to Giant Citizen Kabuto, which was like this weird third-person shooter that then evolved into an RPS that then sort of became a beat-em-up, and it was a whole thing. It was a very, very strange and eclectic game. And as I understand, this is very similar, at least in the sense it's a very strange and eclectic third-person shooter. I am looking forward to playing this one a lot. Alright, next we have Sonic Colors. I've heard lots of good things about Sonic Colors. I have never actually played Sonic Colors, and I got this for $5, so that's pretty cool. The only perspective I really have on Sonic Colors is that I've heard it's very, very good, but also that I've played Sonic Generations, and Sonic Colors, at least the part that was contributed to Sonic Generations, was part of the things that I didn't like about Sonic Generations. Like, Sonic Generations was, aside from the fact that it was a game that betrayed its core concept of bringing old school Sonic with new school Sonic together, because it all basically played side-scrolling the entire time, the thing that I liked about Sonic Generation was the fact that it removed all the gimmicks that Sonic has been adding since Sonic Adventure 2, just after with Sonic Heroes. And, you know, the gimmicks are, where I'm saying, the one thing that's really holding Sonic back. Well, that and lack of quality, I suppose. But, you know, it's the continual insistence of adding gimmicks that makes the Sonic games as bad as they are. And, you know, I've said this so many times, but Sonic fans are not hard to please. If you just make a platformer that's got some solid platforming and moves at a decent clip, that'll probably please Sonic fans. I mean, that's why the Spark games are so good. Comet the Astrodian, which I just played, quite good as a sort of kind of Sonic game. There's a few fan games that actually work as Sonic games really well because they know not to add a bunch of extra vestigial nonsense that just completely breaks the flow of the game. And when I was playing Sonic Generations, that was very much the case, pretty much until you got Colors, when they started adding the Wisps, which give Sonic like temporary superpowers. And it's like, yeah, the game was working fine until you added all these extra mechanics we now have to micromanage for a few levels that just didn't blend with the rest of the game. This is a game that's going to be built entirely around those mechanics, so it might work better, but I am hesitant because, again, it is adding extra mechanics where they don't necessarily need to be, but who knows, it might be quite good. I know it's often well regarded. The last game I got from this one seller is Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. And Metroid Prime 3 of the Prime trilogy, we're not counting Hunters or the demo thing, I would say sits squarely in the middle. I still think the first Metroid Prime is the best one. Metroid Prime 2 I think is probably the most atmospheric of the bunch, but I don't like how much backtracking there is in that game. This game has some really interesting atmospheric moments. There's a moment where you walk on this like dead battleship and you're just wandering around, it's perfectly quiet, and you like gaze outside like through like these windows and you see all these Metroids just floating past in like the background. It's super, super creepy. And then they start jumping out at you and you have to keep going through like this dead derelict ship, and it's so freaky. That level is just peak horror right there. The rest of the game I'm not so sure I like though. First of all, it is ridiculously easy by design. The whole core is that Samus is now corrupted by Phazon, this like super radioactive thing that's giving her superpowers, so she kind of has moments where she can go supercharged using them, and she's basically unkillable in that time. In fact, there are moments where she gets overcharged and she has to be in this form and just has to like dump superpowered attacks out just so to flush it out of her system or whatever. So there's just moments where you're basically invulnerable but can die instantly if you don't indulge your invulnerability. I didn't like that. It felt very, very easy. There's also like this core thing of these 3 other mercenaries running around with you, and they're all corrupted as well. And the first level is you working with these mercenaries, but later on, once they're corrupted, they go entirely silent. And It's just a matter of time before you fight them as bosses and you steal their powers for yourself. But that kind of bugged me as well. Like, the idea of Samus working for other people, or working with other people, that's not really how she works or operates, as seen in every other Metroid game ever. But it could be interesting. The fact that they weren't willing to commit to that bugs me a lot, because I think your interactions with these other characters were far more interesting, and seeing how they bounced off you was actually kind of interesting. You even get a little bit of a moment where you do have to work with like this random no-name mook, and there's a reason for it, but you know, I just feel like in general, this was kind of a weak game. I think quality-wise it was better than Metroid Prime 2 because there wasn't as much backtracking, but I think it was just a very easy game. It didn't lean into its concept well enough, and it just lacked a lot of things. There's one different outfit you get across the entire game, and you get it literally at the end of the game, so that's kind of sad. There are some nice details in the game though as well. One last thing is, this is where Dark Samus got redesigned to look how she does now, and how you'll see her in Smash and stuff. I don't like that redesign all that much. I like her original design where she was all black and like her shoulders were deteriorating with like glowy white energy and stuff. Way better design. Don't like this new design as much where she's blue. I just, it doesn't hit so hard. It's less intimidating and scary. Okay, these next 4 games I got my local Goodwill. Starting with Kingdom Hearts 4.5 plus 2.5 Remix HD something. I don't understand Kingdom Hearts at all. I tried to play Kingdom Hearts 1 at one point. I gave up at the Cave of Wonders because I got sick of running into so many fights I wasn't supposed to win. I never liked the whole Final Fantasy meets Disney thing. That seemed like such an odd concept for me, and it just didn't really mesh. I'm kind of tempted to try and get the whole collection just to try again, maybe. We'll see. A friend of mine did like have me sit down and watch them play a little bit of Kingdom Hearts 3, and it was all over the place. Although I will say I was surprised about something. Main character of this game is played by Haley Joel Osment of all people. And I was actually just thinking the other day, what has he been in? Because I thought he was like one of those child actors that stops acting once they hit puberty, but no, he's just been in Kingdom Hearts. Way to go, Haley Joel Osment. Rock on, you're doing a great job as Sora. But for a brief time I had that weird DS game, what was it, 365 divided by 2 over the square root of pi days, every other Tuesday or whatever it was. I've got a poster of that too, but that game was weird. I don't understand Kingdom Hearts. I might try and play them to try and understand Kingdom Hearts, but I don't want to try. Honestly, it seems like a very big undertaking for very little payoff. Next we have Uncharted Drake's Fortune. This is the only Uncharted game I didn't have. I started with the second game, really liked it. Got Uncharted 3. In fact, I got the big super collector's edition version of that, and it was very lukewarm. I have Uncharted 4 as well, but I never played it. This game was a very early PlayStation game, as I understand it. It actually uses like the tilt sensor in the PlayStation controller and stuff to like balance Drake and stuff. I can't imagine that's going to be all that good, but it was $3 and it completes the set, so might as well have it. Next we have Dragon Age Origins. I played this way back in the day on the PS3, and this game is... I want to like Dragon Age Origins, I really do. I played through it, and I think it was a great world. It had great characters and a great story. I hated the gameplay to it. It was designed like MMO gameplay where you like click on the enemy and then your character just runs over and auto attacks them for a while, and like sometimes you can put in like a special ability. I find that to be like the most tedious, boring way to play a game. Like that's the same reason why I have some issues with the Xenoblade games, although I at least like the aesthetic of those games a lot more, and the fact that it leans into being a single player MMO. But I do not like auto attacking games so much. This was also the weird game that had characters who would walk up to you and beg you desperately, like their lives were depending on you helping them, and then told you to actually pay them money to buy the DLC to go save their family. Which is, you know, if it's that important to you, buddy, you buy it. You buy the DLC to save your family, and then I'll go do it, I guess. But I played Dragon Age Origins. Never played Awakening. Played Dragon Age 2. Played Dragon Age Inquisition. Really hated Inquisition, but I remember the first level of Inquisition, you like find this super mega dragon that's like level 100, and you're not supposed to beat him until like the end of the game. Yeah, I actually have an Xbox One clip of me killing him at level 1, because I figured out you could just lob fireballs from outside his detection range and hit him. So over the course of 2 hours of me just lobbing fireballs at him, I killed him. It's a weird Dragon Age story I have, okay? Next we have Dragon Age 2, still need to get Awakening. Whereas Dragon Age 1 was a game that had an amazing world but terrible gameplay, this is the exact inverse of that. It actually has some pretty okay hacky-slashy action RPG-y gameplay. It's a bit generic and needs a lot more refinement and a bit more of a hook, but it plays well enough. The problem is the story is completely dumb. Like, in the first game, you play this guy who has to save the world from like this encroaching darkness that's going to destroy the entire world, and as you play through the game, you'll actually see like the encroaching darkness actually consume the map, and you won't be able to go back to previous areas and stuff. Here, you play some guy who's basically the city janitor. That's it. Like, each chapter is you just dealing with local issues in this town. Like, you start out as basically being like this poor urchin who's living with his uncle or whatever, and starting with the second chapter, you're rich or whatever because you've done such a great service to the city, but the entire time, you are stuck in this one city, doing like the most mundane crap. So the gameplay is really, really good, but the scale is so much smaller, and I guess they were trying to go for more like of an intimate feel with this game, but it just misses so hard. But the gameplay was kind of okay, I guess. Like, I guess Inquisition is supposed to be like the marriage of the two, but it does everything, in my opinion, kind of wrong. I feel like the Dragon Age series has been on a downward slope since the first game, honestly. Now, the next set of games I ordered from everyone's favorite color with 2 sets of repeated letters, vermilion with 2 ends. I've actually got a whole video of me unboxing this stuff, but let's go through it anyway. We got some Game Boy games. We got Pokemon Puzzle League on the Game Boy, which, I've got Tetris Attack, I've got Panel de Pon, but that's cool. We've got Hakuto no Ken, which I'm not super familiar with Fist of the North Star, but this looks interesting, and it's a game I didn't have, so that's a cool one to add to the collection. When I'm done this, I'm actually going to record my entire Game Boy collection, so that's a video you can go and look up once I'm done this. Next we have, this is Magic Knight Rayearth. I'm familiar with the Sega Saturn game, which was very playable in Japanese. This, I've been told, is actually very text-heavy and won't be, but we'll see what we can do with that all the same. Next we have Medarats 2 Kuwagata. I actually already own a version of this. In fact, I own the English updated version as well. But I quite like Medarats. I love this series very, very deeply, and I have made it a life goal to try and own every English playable Medarat Kuwagata version. Basically anything that can play on a region-free system. And I've got a good number of them. In fact, I think I'm only missing one at this point, which is the weird English reskin of a different Metabots fighting game. But, yeah, I'm working on that. Next we have Koro Koro Kirby, which I've got a gameplay video of this that I recorded years ago. For whatever reason, it's the most popular video I have next to my Animal Crossing music video, which is also bafflingly popular to me. Why is it nothing I actually work on is popular? Like, everything I have to edit, and I actually put in, like, hours upon hours upon hours of effort, none of that stuff gets watched. The stuff where I just record myself playing games or just record my character sitting around while recording music, for some reason, that's the popular stuff. I don't understand this world. But this is Kirby Tilt and Tumble. It's a weird game. It's built like a classic Game Boy game. Like, it even has a little latch notch in it, but this will not work in a classic Game Boy. It's Game Boy Color only, although you can put it in a Game Boy Advance, or if you want to record it for a YouTube video, you can do what I did and have a really awkward time playing it by putting it in a GameCube. Because this game doesn't control with a controller, it controls using that chip right there, which is a built-in tilt sensor. So if you're recording a YouTube video for this, you're going to be tilting a GameCube in your lap. I've done that. It's awkward. For some reason, people really like my gameplay video of that. But I already own a copy of this. It's a weird curio more than anything. But I guess that's something I have. Alright, next we have some games that actually kind of matter to me. Starting with Xenogears. I'm a big fan of Xenoblade. I've always wanted Xenogears. I even have most of Xenosaga, so at this point, the only Xeno games I don't have are the Torna expansion for Xenoblade 2, if you count that as a separate game, and Xenosaga 3. But I'm thinking about doing a Let's Play of this on my Twitch stream. Gotta finish RoboTrek, which I'm thinking about finishing tomorrow, but really excited about Xenogears. This is a game that's got me really excited. As I've said, I've been working on my PlayStation collection. This is a huge step forward for me. And most of my PlayStation collection, actually, I've bought from Vermilion. So, yeah, he's adding to my PlayStation collection. Next we have Chrono Cross. I actually have a box version of this, or a sealed box version of this, but this one's unsealed, so I can actually open it without feeling bad about it. This is sort of the sequel to Chrono Trigger. It had an interesting dialogue system where there's like 40 different playable characters and everyone has like a different dialect, so they have to, as I understand it, it's sort of like on the fly generate text for every text box for the characters to match their dialect. It's a very weird system, but that's what they had to do to give everyone like a different unique tone and dialect, so it's interesting. Alright, next we have a game a lot of people like that I can't stand, Final Fantasy VII. This is what I consider the embodiment of everything wrong with Final Fantasy to this day, but it's the one people like and it's one I didn't have, so there's that. Next we have Final Fantasy VIII. It was a really, really good card game. That's the most positive thing I can say about it. Also, it's an incredibly broken game. It has that really neat siphon junction system, which can break your game wide open pretty much from the start. That, and when you combine it with like the really cool like motion capture, which I quite like, as well as like the side stories featuring this guy's dad as opposed to him, you've got some good things. This guy's story sucks. And it's mostly sort of a not quite incestuous relationship with his not quite sister. It's a whole thing. It's not an interesting story. The story of his dad is far more interesting, and the game should have probably been a focus on him and his relationships and his awesome theme song. But this means that I have all the Final Fantasy games on PS1, with the exception of the remakes, Tactics Advance, and if you count it, Vagrant Story. But I have 7, 8, and 9. Which are like the big important ones, I guess. I've got one more game I got off eBay that I've been meaning to get to. This is Kyohei Toshi, the city shrouded in shadow. This is not the story of some hero. This is your story. This is a PS4 import. This is probably the first PS4 import I ever heard of, and I wanted to play it. I'm about to compare this to a game I've never played, so that's not a great sign, but hear me out. It reminds me conceptually a lot of those old disaster report games. The idea that you're, surviving like a city that's been hit with an earthquake or a flood or whatever, and you're just trying to get by. Except instead of a flood or a, earthquake or whatever, replace all that with Kaiju, Ava Unit 1, Pat LeBur, good old Ultraman. I think there might be a Gundam in here. Basically, you're running around giant tokusatsu monsters, kaiju, nonsense, robots, and you're just trying to scurry away from all the danger as it's happening around you. It's an interesting concept, and I'm excited to play it. Not sure how playable this actually is without an English translation, but it was an interesting import only, and I really wanted to try it, so now I have it. Okay, do I have room on this thing? Probably not, but we'll see what we can do. So, like I said, I have been working very, very hard. I've made it sort of a goal of this year to work on my Sega Genesis collection. So I have not 1, not 2, but 11 Genesis games right here. So here we are. So here we are with my 11 Genesis games, starting with probably the most wanted one I've got out of the bunch, Landstalker. Now, Landstalker, if you're not familiar with, is a isometric adventure game where you play as this guy, Nigel. He runs around trying to look for this legendary treasure of King Noel on this random island that he gets taken to by a giant bird, and it's a really neat sort of high fantasy adventure. I quite liked it. I remember seeing this in a manual at one point, I think for Shining Force back in the day, and this was a game I'd always wanted to get. It's actually really hard to find. It's held its value quite a lot. In fact, a lot of Genesis prices are going up. It's part of the reason that I really wanted to work on my Genesis collection, on top of the fact that I've had a Genesis since I was a kid, and I had all of like 2 games, and at this point, since I started this series, I've got like 10 games, and only one of them was any good. So, you know, working on this, especially now that the prices are going up, was super important, and this was a big one for me. So, real happy I got Landstalker. Following that up, we have a game that was actually worked on by some of the people in Landstalker, or rather the other way around. The people who worked on this worked on Landstalker. We have good old Shining Force, which you have to shout out because seriously, Shining Force sounds like some kind of awesome glam metal band. This is a huge game for me. I remember the day I first rented it at my local video store. I went there, and the first thing you do when you go to the video store is you go and get a gumball, because they have a gumball machine, and I got a black gumball, and that was a special promotional thing. Across my entire life, I only got like, I think 4 black gumballs. If you got a black gumball, that meant that you got a free rental. So me being a kid, this meant that, you know, the rental my parents were paying for, plus 1 more. I got this and its sequel because I was ambitious at the time, and rented them and tried to play them the exact same night. What's really funny is those 2 games were my introduction to the anime art style, because these are very anime strategy RPGs. They are sort of analogous to it's sort of the Genesis version of Fire Emblem, effectively. And this was my introduction to anime, like I said. Well, later that night that I rented this, I saw an ad for something on TV, and I wanted to see it. But I wasn't allowed to stay up that late because I was a kid, and my bedtime was like 7 p.m. So I snuck out of bed, kept the TV on super low, and turned on something very, very anime, and I was introduced to Gundam. So it was sort of like a weird trifecta of awesome. I had Shining Force 2, and Gundam teach me all about what anime was in one night, and that was a very, very impactful night of my life. I think the sequel to Shining Force is much, much better, but these are really cool strategy RPGs. They're set in such amazing worlds with incredible, like, lore and people in them. Like, there's about 1 million different races. You've got humans, centaurs, robots, golems, harpies, all kinds of monsters. There's like armadillos. I think there's a mech pilot from what I remember. I like the second one more than this, and not just because it stars David Bowie, that doesn't hurt, but this is a very, very cool game, and because it was so impactful in my life, and because I had the sequel to it, I kind of needed Shining Force. And as of now, I now have 2/3 of the Shining series on the Genesis, so I'm gonna have to get the 3rd one, even though it was like a first-person turn-based dungeon crawly thing I don't have that much interest in. But Shining Force, I think it's a must-have for the Genesis, and I'm glad I finally have it. And the people who worked on that helped work on Landstalker. And the people who worked on that made Golden Sun, which is one of the most impactful games of my life. Following that up, we have a pretty obscure, I would call it like a C or D tier kind of game, but I really, really wanted it. I remember seeing footage of it probably in like YouTube 1.0, and I just thought, you know, I need to have this. It looks so cool. We have a game by everyone's favorite gas and electric concern, Vic Tokai. This is Mazen Saga Mutant Fighter. This is based on this weird like manga series that was kind of combining Mazinger Z with Devilman of all things. So you basically had Mazinger Z, but much, much harder and more metal in design. Like the characters' designs are super cool. It is kind of a hacky slashy beat 'em up of sorts, but then there's like fight segments against bosses that turn the game into kind of rock'em sock'em robots. It's a very, very stylish game. The characters move sort of like every one of their appendages is like a separate sprite interacting with other stuff, not dissimilar to like, say, how Ernest Evans worked, but on a bigger scale and with slightly more polish but slightly less charm. I always wanted this game. This was a big one for me. I'm glad I got it. It was very expensive though, but most Genesis games seem to be getting that way. Following that up, we actually have a game that I didn't plan on buying. I just sort of got it super, super cheap, so I thought, why not? This is a game I think is pretty well regarded, but I don't care much for it. We have Revenge of Shinobi. This is, I think, the 3rd Shinobi game, even though there's another Shinobi 3 out there, but it's one of 3 Shinobi games on the Genesis. There's Revenge of Shinobi, Shadow Dancer, which was Shinobi 2, as well as Shinobi 3. And I don't like Revenge of Shinobi all that much. There's nothing wrong with it, really, but it just doesn't hit all that hard with me. I played Shinobi 3 on the Genesis collection on the PS3, and I loved that game, and I've always wanted to play Shadow Dancer because it has a doggle in it, and I like my doggles. But this is Revenge of Shinobi. It's a game where you play as a shinobi, and you run around hitting things with your sword, throwing shurikens out, using your jutsus to kill monsters and stuff. Not as much interested in Revenge as the other 2, but I guess I'm going to try and get all 3 for my Genesis collection now. But I know a lot of people like Revenge of Shinobi. So it's cool to have that. It's just not something that's necessarily for me, so to speak. Next we have a game I didn't even realize was on the Genesis. We have Star Control. So many years ago now, I reviewed a game called Star Flight on the Genesis, and it was basically if you took the original Mass Effect and just put it on the Sega Genesis. It was awesome. Apparently, that inspired this game, Star Control, although of course they were PC versions before this. I've played a little bit of this, and I'm not sure I'm playing it right, or maybe I need the manual or something, but all I could really do was see this like 3D star map that looked like it was made of Atari 2600 sprites, and then like I could fortify places or build bases, but it didn't seem to actually do anything, and then I like could run into people and it would turn into basically competitive asteroids, but that was sort of it. I might need the manual to this or something, or spend more time with it, but it felt a little bit underwhelming, and I honestly like Starflight a lot more. But I want to spend some more time with this. I know that there was a sequel to this and a remake of the sequel to this, and I think there might be another Star Control coming out or came out a while ago on PC, but this was inspired by Starflight, and I really, really liked Starflight, so I really wanted to spend some time with this. So I got it. Alright, our next game is... Alright, let's pretend that Genesis stack didn't just fall. Our next game is also by everyone's favorite electric and gas concern, Vic Tokai. We have Socket. This is a weird Me Too mascot platformer by them that's desperately trying to be Sonic, and I think this might be an attempt at creating a mascot for themselves, because he's like this little kind of sort of duck thing that has a electrical socket as part of his tail, and like the whole thing is he runs from one power charge station at the start of the level to charge one at the end of the level, and that's kind of his whole thing. It's very weird, but if you look at it from the lens that it's from an electric company that also just put out games every now and then, it makes a little bit more sense, sort of. This is a very obscure mascot platformer. There's one more really, really obscure mascot platformer I want to get on the Genesis. But I like Vic Tokai. They made my second favorite NES game of all time. They made some really weird games, some really good, some really bad. They made the really, really awful Kid Cool, and like all 3 games associated with that. But this game is kinda okay if you take it as like definitely trying to be knockoff Sonic. It's not great, it's not even really good, but it's interesting, and I'm glad I've got it. And it's Vic Tokai, and I actually really quite love Vic Tokai and their weird things. Next we have a game I've wanted for a very long time, and it's very expensive. Lightning Force, Quest for the Dark Star. I think they were trying to go for Lightning Force, but instead they went with Lightning Force. You know, they went with Lightning Force because this is, you know, like Thunder Force, but with more force. But they called it Lightning, so it's actually less force, which is not correct. This is the most forceful Thunder Force game of them all. I like the Thunder Force games a lot. I really like Thunder Force 2. I know a lot of people dislike its top-down stuff. I actually really kind of like it. This one is probably the most polished Thunder Force game of them all, and it's very high demand. It's not the most high demand shmup on the system. That's a game I really desperately want because it's the best shmup I've ever played, but this was a game that I've wanted for a very, very long time as a fan of Thunder Force, and now I just need to get Thunder Force 3 to get the full set. This is a side-scrolling, horizontal-scrolling shmup where you get to pick the level you start with, as well as the order in which you tackle levels. You get to use a bunch of different crazy weapons. It's very, very difficult, but it looks great, sounds great. The Thunder Force series has always been a great proponent of how you could effectively use the Genesis sound chip in a way that makes a really good soundtrack. I know a lot of people like to diss the Genesis for its low quality sound compared to, like, say, the Super Nintendo, but seriously, play Thunder Force 3 on the Super Nintendo and then come talk to me. Because I have, it's awful comparatively. But Thunder Force 4 was a game I really wanted. I want to collect all the Thunder Force games, so now I just need the third one on the Genesis, and I guess the fifth one at some point, but, you know, right now I'm just focusing on the Genesis stuff. But, yeah. Thunder Force 4. Next we have a game I kind of bought just because I sort of have the analogous game on the Super Nintendo. We have Quackshot, starring Donald Duck. I have this game called Maui Mallard in Cold Shadow on the Super Nintendo, which actually did start off life on the Genesis in Brazil, but in North America it was only released on the Super Nintendo, and that was a game where they scrubbed any of Donald Duck's identity, but made him kind of like this badass ninja. In this game, Donald Duck is kind of trying to sort of be Indiana Jones. So I've got the weird one where he's a ninja, and now I've got the weird one where he's indie. And that's interesting to me. I mean, he's still Disney's third best duck, but, you know, it's cool. I like weird Donald Duck games, so I'll play weird Donald Duck games. Following that up, we have another game kind of like Revenge of Shinobi, in that it's not a game I actively tried to get, but I got it super cheap, so why not? We have Fatal Labyrinth. Fatal Labyrinth is basically kind of like Rogue, but on the Genesis. And I don't mean it's a rogue-like, I mean it's literally Rogue on the Genesis. You know, you've got like these empty rooms that you can't see into until you enter. Everything in terms of items is entirely randomized every time you play, and you're just trying to go through like 30 floors of this dungeon. It's slow, it's clunky, I don't think it's all that fun, but it's an RPG, and it'd be cool to get all the RPGs for the system because I am an RPG guy. But like I said, this game isn't great. I think the best thing about it is the measure of your worth at the end of the day when you lose is how fancy your funeral is, based on like how much wealth you accrued. And that is incredibly cynical and dark, and I kind of love it. But that's like the only thing about Fatal Labyrinth I remember positively. Alright, next we have a game I thought I bought last year when I bought a different game entirely. And it turns out this game is really expensive. We have a game called Warsong, or as it's known in North America now, L'Ingressier, which is a long-running strategy RPG series. I played a little bit of this. I really quite like it, but it has some issues. Again, if you ignore Shining Force, this is sort of like the Genesis equivalent of, say, Fire Emblem. Except that instead of controlling individual units, each individual unit controls like armies of several people, which they themselves are made up of several units. And because every character is represented by several characters, that means that instead of like a fight comprised of 5 characters, now a fight is comprised of 5 groups of 5 characters, which means every single turn takes forever. Like, I think the first turn of the first fight I was in took about 5 minutes of just auto going through all the different non-playable characters I wasn't controlling and their moves. It's very, very, very slow. But I am enjoying this, and I think it's got an interesting story with cool characters. I want to see where this goes. That said, it's also been remade, and it's a lot more stylized now. Although, to be fair, I've seen the remake, and I don't think it looks all that good. But there was a second game on the Genesis as well, although it was Japanese exclusive, although it has been fan-translated, of course. And now we have one last Genesis game. I wasn't planning on buying this, but it was one of those things where no one had bid on the auction, and I got it with the minimum bid, and it gave me a reason to actually have, like, I before this didn't have any physical Genesis cases. Now I have a physical Genesis case. We have The World of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And I love these Genesis cases. The case alone was worth like the $15 I paid for this. But this is part of the Castle of Illusion and the Land of Illusion. I have played neither of those games, but I remember this being a game where you play as Mickey and Donald. I think you have magic capes that you fling sparkles out of to hurt enemies and stuff. That's pretty much all I remember about it. But again, I bought this mainly just because it was cheap, it was a single minimum bid, and it gave me a Genesis case, and I really, really fondly remember these Genesis cases. Alright, and we have one other really big thing I would like to show off before we move on to the last thing. And that is about a Steam Deck. So here's the deal. I'm not super big into PC gaming. Like, I'm not. I don't want to get in front of my PC and have to deal with, like, everything that involves PC gaming. That is not my style. And one of the biggest things for me was I wanted to stream PC games sometimes, but every time I tried, it felt like my computer was just running too slow to do it effectively. I've tried it a couple times, but it's very stressful. My computer seems to struggle to both run like a stream and play the game at once. So that really pushed me over the edge. That, and this was on sale for the first time since it launched. This is the big, fancy, expensive version because they are all very expensive, but for $100 more, I get double the space and a bunch of other nonsense. It's mostly just useless accessories. But I have to admit, I don't consider myself much of a PC gamer, but I've probably put in 30, 40 hours into my Steam Deck over the past probably week, month. I don't know why my camera's going crazy with the lighting. Sorry about that. But yeah, I bought a Steam Deck. It has proven to be thus far pretty worth the money, with one big issue. I record this docked, and I found that every once in a while, like, the sound will just cut out for periods of like 10 to 20 seconds, just randomly. And, you know, logic would dictate that's a problem with the dock, but I looked it up, and it seems to be a pretty consistent issue that Valve seems to be wanting to address with a patch, so maybe it's not a dock issue, I don't know, but yeah, I got a Steam Deck. I gotta figure out that sound issue, but otherwise I'm having a lot of fun with this, and I have spent a lot of time playing PC games that I just don't normally do. And this has really opened up some opportunities for me because, honestly, I'd rather just have this on my TV and not have to deal with my entire computer or anything like that, you know? It was very expensive, but thus far worth it. And now it's time to ask ourselves the all-important question. Just what is inside the treasure chest of awesome? Let's find out. Well, this time, I'd say it's a handheld. Probably the coolest handheld ever, and yes, that's going up against the Steam Deck. We have a Neo Geo Pocket Color. Okay, I might be the only person excited about this over, say, the Steam Deck, but this is something I have always wanted. Since I started this YouTube channel, I have wanted a Neo Geo Pocket Color, and you know, when I started, they cost about $50. Now they cost close to like 5 times that. So, for a birthday present for myself, I decided to fulfill a lifelong dream of mine and get a Neo Geo Pocket Color. Now that said, the screen is actually kind of scratched up. You can kind of see like right there. I have no games for it, so I decided because this was going to cost so much, let's do what I did with the Steam Deck and get the most expensive thing I can possibly find. And by that I mean, let's mod the ever-living crap out of this and make it a Super Neo Geo Pocket Color. Let's make it the best Neo Geo Pocket Color ever, because we are building dreams, damn it. And so, how about this little upgrade, which will give us rumble, it'll give us a bigger profile, a charge cable, and stereo sound. I'm working on buying myself a multi-cart so I can put the entire library on it, and I'm trying to get backlighting on this thing and a replacement for the screen, because if this is going to cost so much as a birthday present to myself, I'm going to make my dreams come true. I always wanted one of these. I'm going to make the best one this world's ever seen, and I'm planning on making a video series about that. I've actually got the first episode done already. Gonna just make it into one thing, I think, but I need to wait for the other upgrade parts before I really put it together. But look forward to that. This is my sort of intro to the dev diary of upgrading a Neo Geo Pocket Color to make the ultimate Neo Geo Pocket Color, and I'm very excited to do this. I've always wanted one of these things. I mean, I don't know how much the camera's actually going to pick that up, but the sticks freaking click. These things are awesome. I'm so excited to have one of these, and now I just got to upgrade it and get some games. I'm looking forward to that. But anyway, I think that will be it for now. Why don't you in the comments tell me what part of my giant awesome loot of this past quarter-ish you liked, and what have you gotten since, we last did one of these, because I'm always on the lookout for cool new games. Let me know what Genesis games you like, because I'm trying to collect them, and PS1 games. That's my goal this year. And, what are your thoughts on the Neo Geo Pocket Color? It's a topic I'm really, really excited about right now. I've also got like 3 other video series kind of ideas in mind I'm kicking around, but need a bit of a budget for that. But anyway, yeah, let me know what you think about this stuff on here. And, like the video, subscribe to see more stuff. And check out my streams to see what I'm doing out there. Might be playing some Xenoblade pretty soon, or Xenogears. Really excited about that. Maybe I'll upgrade my Neo Geo Pocket Color Live. Who knows? And, if you really want to make my day, check out the show's PayPal or Patreon. Support the show any way you can so that I can continue to do what I do to the best of my ability, which in this case is get a handheld that, let's just be honest, might be cooler than the Steamdeck. I stand by that, damn it. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, Internet.